Flight attendants and pilots of Reddit, what are some things that happen mid-flight that only the crew are aware of? There's a special frequency called guard that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies, or for when an aircraft ends up on a wrong frequency and the controllers need to get contact with them to change them to the right frequency. It's full of pilots meowing at each other, and people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls. Pilot here, late to the party as usual. But sometimes the passengers may be having a nice quiet flight in the back while the pilots are up front dodging thunderstorms and yelling their heads off. We will not only transport dead bodies, but also live transplants, like hearts and lungs. I particularly like the live transplants because we get to cut to the front of the line for takeoff and we get all the shortcuts to our destination. Tip for those who get motion sickness: try not to move your head around. Pilots move their eyes instead of their heads to look at the instruments in the flight deck. Also try to sit in a seat over the wing. This area of the plane doesn't rotate as much during climbs and descents. Flight attendants can't do pilots' job, but pilots can't do flight attendants' jobs for sure. We aren't hired for our people skills. Don't take off your shoes to go to the bathroom. People pee on the floor all the time. An instructor told me that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 35 minutes at the same time, while gaining hours for licensing. The plane was in complete autopilot mode, clear skies, zero turbulence. They both swore if they ever flew again they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls. Prisoners are transported on commercial airline flights. Sometimes law enforcement officers are escorting them. On days with low ceiling/visibility and overall crappy weather, we may end up being within minutes of making the decision to divert due to fuel, especially if we end up having to hold. This isn't to say we don't have enough fuel. Legally, we must have enough fuel on board to shoot an approach to our destination, go around, fly to AMP, land at our alternate airport if we have one, and even then, still have 45 minutes of fuel on board. Armed law enforcement officers on board, sometimes not escorting anyone. Flying faster to get there earlier if a crew member has a commute to catch home. Chatting/joking with ATK if frequency isn't busy. Delta pilots reporting light chop. Pilot making Pennsylvania announcement over frequency rather than Pennsylvania. Yes, the meowing on guard, as well as other nonsense. Asking ATK how the rides are only to be told they suck at all altitudes. We try to get away from the turbulence, but it's not always possible, and we can't predict it, and can't see it, can only make educated guesses as to where it may be. It's hot back there during the summer mostly, we know. We have it blowing as hard as it can and cold as it can. We're sorry it ends up feeling like a baby's breath. Meanwhile our air vents are keeping us cool if we're lucky. The iPad you may see us in the cockpit has all our manuals, approach plates, maps, checklists, etc. Basically almost everything we need. It really is incredible. Just hope that they both don't decide to brick themselves at the same time in the air. Yes, there isn't a single cloud in the sky where we are now. Meanwhile our destination is encompassed by a massive thunderstorm. We don't like being late either, but we're paid to deliver living passengers. And we can't collect that paycheck if we're also dead. There's a chance your flight could be a pilot's very first flight in an actual jet. He could be fresh out of training, out of the simulator, and actually flying the jet aircraft. Scary, right? Well, that pilot could probably explain every single system of that aircraft in depth. Guys that have been flying the line for years. Maybe not quite as in depth. Oh, and that brand new jet pilot is flying with a Czech airman, who is there to further teach that new pilot about flying on the line. The autopilot can fly for a majority of the flight. We have to at least take off and land. Auto-land isn't used for everyday normal operation. Different airlines have different rules on autopilot use. We must have the autopilot on above FL 220,000 feet unless it is a NOP, so we can hand fly up to that altitude, and sometimes do. If we never go above that altitude, we can hand fly the entire flight, never turning the autopilot on, which we also sometimes do, and is often encouraged to maintain piloting skills. A lady who was feeling very ill crapped her pants mid-flight. A very kind FA managed to get her covered in a blanket and into the bathroom with barely anyone noticing, and then gave her a pair of her own pants to wear so she wouldn't be embarrassed. I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee, but it didn't help much. I asked him if he was retiring soon, but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. Pretty scary. As an air traffic controller, we are constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and then when we key up we use our nice guy voices. We sat in a backed up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in. Nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time, suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the public announcement holding up a 2-foot-long piece of metal he had pulled from one of the tires. He explained if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting he might have never spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff roll and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel, or whatever. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. To this day I had no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing welcome aboard, weather in Chicago, and so on frequency instead of the aircraft PA system, blocking up ground, ramp, tower, etc. for a solid 15 seconds. You automatically become the laughingstock of the airport. Ex-airline employee here. Often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature in one end of the cabin hotter and it localizes the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging anywhere, it's because someone smells like opened ass somewhere on the plane. Fizz often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat he's in. Pilots fuck around a lot up front. They'll take pictures, post on FB, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on long flights. Not sure if it's been mentioned already. I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the CC cabin crew make it less obvious that they have passed. Put glasses on them, maybe a hat. Essentially dress them up as subtle as possible to not alert and or panic the other passengers. FA here. Crop dusting. Basically farting whilst we walk down the aisle due to the bloating. If you fly frequently, there's a high chance an FA has farted right by your head as they walk down the aisle. So inside the cockpit when we flew back home from Orlando to Norway and the pilot was asleep, I kinda freaked out for a second, but the attendee said it's normal. It freaked me out too much. Then the second co-pilot waved at me and said hello in some other language. I was only a month or two out of IO initial operating experience at my first airline job, flying right seat in a regional jet. I had just come back from the bathroom when the captain pointed that several flight instruments on his side had failed, and he had reverted to using data from my side. Basically told his main flight display to start using data from the second independent system soon. However, that went bad too. The autopilot disconnected, and here we were at 25,000 feet or so, in icing, hand flying off a tiny little combined last-ditch backup instrument called an ESE, Integrated Electronic Standby Instrument, if memory serves. We declared an emergency, asked AT to point us in the direction of better weather, and tried to figure out what the hell was happening. Icing on both primary pitot tubes maybe, though that shouldn't happen, they are heated. In any case, we ended up making a perfectly safe landing after a diversion, and the passengers never had any idea that, for a few minutes, I was really concerned that things were about to turn very, very bad and that we were down to our emergency backup gauge. That's the shortened version without most of the techno-babble anyway. Not an airline pilot yet, just got hired by my first airline and start class next month, but I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airline pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations and business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises is 100% true. Also, whenever someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they yell "see you," and then a dozen other pilots will key up yelling "see ya" one after another. We also enjoy talking shit about people who say "with you," "got him on the fish finder," "any traffic please advise," and 3 and 5. Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a shit about turbulence or having to do a go-around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about: thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, etc. Flying Paris-greater than Seattle. Normal uneventful flight. I don't think there was Wi-Fi available on the flight. When we land, we are greeted by tons of heavily armed National Guard, police, etc. K9s. The Paris terror attacks happened about an hour or so into our flight. Passengers had no idea that the attack had happened until everyone got cell phone reception and floods of "Are you okay?" texts. I assumed the crew knew the whole time, as soon as it happened. Never said a word about it.